Ruth Navarro's water glass slipped from her hand when the courtroom clerk read my name. It struck the oak counsel table with a hard crack, bounced once, and rolled through the silence. Lieutenant Commander Elise Navarro, the old tear beneath my right shoulder blade, left years earlier when a boarding ladder slammed me against a cutter in heavy seas, tightened as I kept both hands flat on the table. 3 seconds earlier, the courtroom clerk had been holding the black envelope with both hands. She placed it square against the edge of her desk and ran a wooden ruler along the bottom, as if even restricted paper had to obey the lines of her courtroom. My mother-in-law sat 3 chairs away. Ruth Navarro had spent the morning calling me a liar and the reason 3 men died aboard the Celia N. She wore navy blue because she believed dark colors made people trust her. A green fountain pen rested between her fingers. She had used that pen to ask the court to reduce $18,600,000 in death and injury claims to $690,000. Now she watched the envelope and smiled. A sealed document cannot rescue a liar. The judge looked over his glasses. Mrs. Navarro. Ruth leaned back, but the smile stayed. My right hand was closed beneath the table. Daniel's steel watch pressed its broken edge into my palm. The crystal had blackened in the fire. The hands had stopped at 2:17 and never moved again. The clerk broke the first seal, then the second. The United States has submitted a redacted public declaration concerning the identity and authority of the boarding officer named in the restricted operational record. The air conditioning clicked 3 times before cold air came through the vent. 3 dry clicks, a pause, then a system pretending everything was normal. The clerk unfolded one sheet. The court is authorized to state that the officer identified in the restricted boarding record was serving as the qualified officer in charge of the federal boarding team and was acting within the lawful scope of. 42 minutes earlier, Ruth still believed the dead could not contradict her. She caught me outside the courtroom, near a line of reporters waiting for the doors to open. 2 widows from the Celia N stood by the elevators, holding paper cups they had not touched. Ruth looked at the silver insignia on my left lapel. Its raised lines had been worn smooth by years of fingers tracing them before difficult work. She reached for it. "Take that fake badge off," she said. "You have already used my son's death to get enough attention." I caught her wrist before her fingers touched the metal. I did not squeeze. I did not raise my voice. "You do not get to touch that." For half a second, something honest appeared in her face. Not fear, recognition. She knew I was done stepping backward. Then her courtroom expression returned. "You bought it online," she said, louder now. "The same place you bought the rest of your story." A reporter turned toward us. I released her wrist. Ruth smoothed her sleeve. She smelled like the cedar blocks she kept in every closet at the family house. Daniel used to joke that his mother wanted even moths to understand who was in charge. "You inspected papers at ports," she said. "That was your job." Daniel told me. Daniel had told her what I was permitted to tell him. That difference had become the foundation of her case. The courtroom doors opened. Ruth walked in first, certain that entering before me still meant she had won something. This was not a criminal trial. No one would leave in handcuffs. That made the stakes harder to explain to people who thought justice always arrived with sirens. Navarro Coastal Freight had asked the federal court to limit what the company owed after the Celia N burned outside Savannah. 3 men died. 2 others carried injuries that would outlive every legal deadline in the building. To win that protection, the company had to prove the disaster happened without the owner's knowledge or involvement. Ruth's solution was simple: blame the boarding team. Blame me. Her petition said I had exaggerated my Coast Guard qualifications, entered the machinery spaces without authority, interfered with the alarm system, and walked away believing my uniform would protect me from questions. When the judge entered, everyone stood. Ruth signed one final page with her green fountain pen and slid it to her attorney. The pen scratched across the paper. I looked down at Daniel's watch. 2:17. The official report said the first bridge alarm sounded at 2:26. 9 minutes should not have mattered after 20 months. But 9 minutes had followed me into every room since the night my husband died. Ruth's attorney rose. "Your Honor, the evidence will show that an unauthorized federal boarding operation disrupted the vessel's safety systems shortly before the casualty." Unauthorized, he let the word sit there. Across the aisle, Ruth looked at my insignia and smiled again. I closed my hand around the watch until the broken crystal bit my skin. At that moment, I did not know what the clerk would eventually be permitted to read from the sealed record. I only knew Ruth had built her defense around one belief. That silence and absence were the same thing. I said nothing. Not because I had no answer, because every answer worth giving had a timestamp, a custodian, and a chain of custody. Ruth thought silence meant emptiness. She did not understand that I was waiting for the record to become speakable. And because I had kept my oath, she could write my part of the story for me. She had been doing it for years, not lying exactly. Ruth preferred cleaner methods. She took whatever part of the truth was visible, trimmed away the pieces she did not like, and presented the remainder as the whole picture. I met Daniel 13 years before the fire at a shipyard coffee stand near the Savannah River. He was arguing with a vending machine. The machine had taken his dollar and refused to release a packet of powdered donuts. Daniel stood in front of it in a white hard hat, speaking with the tired patience of a man negotiating with a stubborn employee. "I have already paid you," he said. "This relationship has rules." I laughed before I could stop myself. He turned, saw the Coast Guard uniform, and straightened as if I had arrived to arrest the machine. "Ma'am, I would like to report a theft." I hit the return button with the side of my fist. The donuts dropped. That was how Daniel Navarro decided I could solve problems. He bought me coffee. I told him my name and almost nothing else. I was between assignments, waiting on orders I could not discuss in a shipyard full of contractors. Daniel did not push. That mattered more than the coffee. He worked for Navarro Coastal Freight, the company his grandfather had started with one rusted tug and a borrowed fuel tank. By the time I met him, the family owned 6 coastal freighters, 2 warehouses, and a headquarters with windows facing the river. Ruth had inherited the company after her husband died. Daniel ran operations, but everyone in the building still lowered their voice when his mother passed an open door. The first time he brought me to dinner, Ruth looked at my uniform before she looked at my face. "What do you do in the Coast Guard, maritime law enforcement?" She waited. I did not expand. Daniel reached for the bread. "Elise checks ships and cargo," he said. It was not completely wrong. It was simply small enough for Ruth to understand. She smiled for the first time that evening. "So paperwork." "Some days Daniel needs someone steady," she said. "The company already gives him enough excitement." Daniel looked embarrassed. I looked at the roast on my plate. Ruth mistook silence for agreement. She would do that for the next 11 years. Daniel never did. He understood that my work came with locked phones, interrupted holidays, and sentences that stopped before the useful part. When I left for training, he did not ask for names. When I returned after weeks away, he did not inspect my stories for missing pieces. He asked whether I wanted food or quiet. Usually I wanted both. We married 2 years later in a courthouse with 4 witnesses. Ruth called it practical in the tone other people used for disappointing. Daniel wore a steel watch that had belonged to his father. The band was too loose, and the second hand jumped whenever the weather turned humid. On our first anniversary, I took it to a repair shop. The watchmaker kept it for 3 weeks and returned it running 8 minutes fast. Daniel loved it. "Now it has urgency," he said. He wore that watch every day after that, including on the night he died. Our marriage was built in the spaces around my absences. There were mornings when I came home before sunrise and found him asleep at the kitchen table with an untouched plate covered in foil. There were birthdays moved to different months. There was one Thanksgiving dinner we ate at 2 in the morning because my flight landed late and Daniel refused to celebrate without me. Ruth saw those absences as evidence. Daniel saw them as part of the agreement. He knew I served in tactical law enforcement. He knew I led boarding teams. He knew enough to understand why I scanned exits when we entered restaurants and why I never sat with my back to a door. He did not know operational names, target vessels, partner agencies, or routes. Not because I distrusted him, because an oath is not a measure of love. It is a boundary placed around information that does not belong to you alone. Ruth never accepted that difference. At family dinners, she called me a port inspector. At company events, she introduced me as someone who handled Coast Guard paperwork. Once at a Christmas party, a retired harbor pilot asked whether I had ever boarded a moving vessel at night. Before I could answer, Ruth laughed. "Elise does not climb onto ships. She reviews forms after the real work is done." Daniel looked at me. I shook my head once. "Not here." He changed the subject. That small decision became a habit. I told myself I was protecting the work. Later, I told myself I was protecting Daniel from being trapped between his wife and his mother. The truth was less flattering. I was tired. Correcting Ruth would not have changed her. It would only have made the room louder, so I let her keep the version of me she preferred. 5 years before the fire, I completed another qualification cycle and took command of a law enforcement detachment assigned to a tactical law enforcement team. The silver insignia came in a plain government box. No velvet, no speech, no family photographs. One of my chiefs handed it to me after a training review and said, "Try not to lose this one in the Atlantic." That night I brought it home in my coat pocket. Daniel was repairing the clasp on his father's watch at the kitchen counter. Tiny screws sat in a white saucer beside him. I placed the insignia next to the saucer. He looked at it for a long moment. "Is this the part where I am allowed to be impressed?" "You were already allowed. I was waiting for official permission." He picked it up by the edges. "What does it mean?" "That I am qualified to lead the team on the ships?" "On the ships," he nodded slowly. Ruth had spent years calling my work paperwork. Daniel had never corrected her because I asked him not to. But in our kitchen, with the smell of machine oil and burnt coffee between us, he understood enough. He fastened the insignia to the inside of my coat, where no one could see it. "There," he said, "you know it is real. I know it is real." That should be enough. For a long time I believed him. Then, 20 months before the hearing, I received orders for a joint maritime operation involving commercial vessels moving through Savannah. The briefing took place in a windowless federal building. Phones stayed outside, names were replaced with roles. The operational annex carried restrictions that would survive the mission itself. Near the end, a photograph of the target vessel appeared on the screen. White superstructure, blue hull, a rust line beneath the aft rail. The name was painted across the stern, Celia N., one of Ruth's freighters. Daniel's vessel. I looked at the operations officer across the table. He did not know Daniel was my husband. No one in the room did. I should have spoken immediately. Instead, I watched the next slide appear and felt the first quiet crack open beneath everything I thought I could keep separate. I did speak, just not as quickly as I should have. I waited until the next slide appeared. Then I raised my hand and asked to speak with the operations officer and legal advisor outside the room. The hallway smelled of carpet glue and old coffee. "My husband is the operations director for Navarro Coastal Freight," I said. "His mother owns the company." The operations officer did not react beyond writing Daniel's name on a yellow legal pad. "Do you hold any financial interest in the vessel?" "No." "Does your husband know the purpose of this operation?" "No." "Have you discussed the target vessel with him?" "I learned the vessel's name less than a minute ago." The legal advisor asked 3 more questions, then she told me to wait outside. For 12 minutes, I stared at a framed photograph of a Coast Guard cutter cutting through water so blue it looked manufactured. When they called me back in, the decision had already been written down. I would remain the boarding officer in charge because the operation was time-sensitive. The target selection had been made independently, and another officer would supervise evidence handling. My family connection would be documented. I would have no role in any later charging recommendation involving Navarro Coastal Freight. It was legal, it was reviewed. It was also the first point in the story where Ruth would later claim I had hidden something. The operation began 48 hours later. The Celia N. sat low in the river under a gray morning sky. Her blue hull was streaked with salt and rust. Containers rose from the deck in uneven rows, each one carrying a different company's promise that what was written on paper matched what was locked inside. Our interest was one container near the aft section. I will not describe why. Even after everything Ruth said about me, some information remained larger than my need to defend myself. Our boat came alongside shortly after 6 in the morning. The Celia N. rolled gently in the wake of an outbound freighter. I watched the ladder rise and fall against the hull. Then I climbed. My hands remembered the rhythm before my mind finished measuring it. Grip, step, wait for the vessel to fall, move when it rises. On the 3rd reach, the old tear beneath my right shoulder blade pulled against the ladder. I shifted my weight, shortened the next reach, and kept climbing. The silver insignia Ruth later called fake was hidden beneath my flotation vest. 6 members of my team came over the rail behind me. The ship's master met us on the main deck. Tomas Vega stood beside him in grease-marked coveralls. I knew Tomas from company dinners, though he and I had never spoken for more than a few minutes at a time. That morning he did not call me Elise, boarding officer, he said. His eyes stayed on my face. He understood that family familiarity had no place on the deck. We verified documents, secured the required spaces, and inspected the container without incident. Another officer maintained custody of everything we collected. The operation should have ended there. On the way back toward the gangway, I noticed a strip of silver tape across a warning light on the bridge alarm repeater panel. The tape had been cut carefully to cover the light without touching the label beneath it. Fire loop fault. I stopped. What is that? Tomas looked past me toward the ship's master. Maintenance test. Is the loop active? It is being serviced. That was not an answer. I lifted the government-issued camera from my vest and photographed the panel. One wide image, one close image, the display clock and vessel position were visible in both. The master stepped closer. That panel is not part of your inspection. No, I said, it is part of the condition of the vessel I am standing on. Tomas rubbed his thumb against his wedding ring. The alarm still works locally, he said. The bridge repeater is under test. Is any part of the fire detection loop bypassed? No one answered. I looked at the master. If the loop is bypassed, this vessel should not sail until it is restored and tested. The master's jaw tightened. We have technicians scheduled. Before departure, he glanced at Tomas. Boarding officer, your operation is complete. He was right about one thing. I did not have authority to conduct a full safety examination under the mission we were performing. I could document what I observed and pass it to the appropriate Coast Guard office. That was what I did. Before my boots left the deck, I transmitted the photographs and a written observation through our reporting channel. The entry reached the shared safety queue at 7:02 that morning. It was routed to the Marine Safety Office, but no officer with authority to hold the vessel reviewed it before the Celia N sailed. Then I climbed down the ladder. Daniel was waiting near the company office when our team returned to the pier. He still wore his orange operations vest. His father's watch hung loosely around his wrist. How bad, he asked. I could not tell him what we found in the container. Instead, I pointed toward the Celia N. Why is the fire loop warning covered? His face changed by less than an inch. It was enough. It is a repeater fault. Is the loop bypassed? The yard electrician looked at it. That is not what I asked. Daniel glanced toward the other members of my team. Can we not do this here? Then give me the answer here and we will not have to do it anywhere else. He exhaled through his nose. One circuit is isolated. The local detectors still function. Does the bridge receive the alarm? They are working on it, Daniel. He looked down at the watch. The second hand jumped twice, hesitated, then continued. If the bridge does not receive the alarm, the ship does not leave. The cargo is already late. That does not change the fire. We lose $620,000 if we miss the delivery window. I had not known the number. Behind us, a container crane gave a long mechanical warning before moving along its track. Then lose the money. His phone vibrated against his vest. The screen showed one word, Mom. Daniel silenced the call. We have 86 people depending on this company. And 5 people sleeping below deck tonight. There are more than 5 crew members. You know what I mean. He looked at the Celia N. For a moment, I saw the man who had waited until 2 in the morning to eat Thanksgiving dinner with me. The man who never demanded that I break an oath to prove I loved him. Then I saw Ruth's son. Just one run, we fix it Monday. I stepped closer. Do not let that ship sail with the loop bypassed. He met my eyes. I heard you. Those were the last words Daniel ever said to me in person. The Celia N departed shortly before midnight. I learned that later. At 2:16 in the morning, Daniel used his access credential to open the service passage door beside the machinery space. At 2:17, a local detector registered a heat condition that never reached the bridge repeater. At the same minute, Daniel's watch stopped. At 2:26, the bridge logged the first general fire alarm. At 2:29, the master issued a distress call. By the time the first response vessel reached the Celia N, flames had already moved through the service passage beside the machinery space. Daniel and 2 crew members were missing. I was called to the command center because of my relationship to the company, and immediately removed from any operational decision involving the rescue. That was correct. It was also unbearable. I sat against the far wall while other officers worked the radios. I knew every term they used. I understood what each pause meant. At 3:12, a rescue team found 1 crew member alive near the aft weather deck. At 3:41, they recovered the first body. At 4:23, the radio traffic changed. No one had to tell me why. People who work emergencies learn the difference between searching for life and recovering the dead. The voices become quieter. Movements slow down. No one says hope is gone, but everyone begins handling the truth with both hands. Daniel was recovered after sunrise. Tomas brought me the watch that afternoon. He had burns along the side of his neck and gauze wrapped around his left hand. He should have been in a hospital bed. Instead, he stood outside an interview room holding a clear evidence bag. Inside was Daniel's watch. The steel band had blackened. The crystal was cracked. Both hands rested at 2:17. Tomas did not offer condolences. Men like him knew grief did not improve when explained. He placed the bag on the chair beside me. It stopped before the bridge alarm did, he said. I looked at him. He twisted his wedding ring once. Then he walked away. For the next 20 months, those 9 missing minutes lived inside my house. They sat beside me while I signed funeral papers. They followed me through the official memorial and Ruth's speeches about Daniel's sacrifice. They waited beneath every report that said the first known bridge alarm came at 2:26. 9 minutes, long enough for a local detector to recognize what the bridge could not hear. Long enough for Daniel to enter the passage and try to correct a decision. Long enough for the truth to begin before the official story did. Ruth began writing the official story before the smoke had cleared from the Celia Inn. The morning after Daniel's body was recovered, she came to my house carrying a folder and 2 cups of coffee. She set 1 cup beside me without asking how I took it. There will be investigators, she said, insurance people. Lawyers, reporters. I was still wearing the clothes I had worn at the command center. The Coast Guard will investigate. The Coast Guard was on the ship. My team was. That is exactly why you cannot speak. I looked at her. Ruth folded her hands over the folder. You have restrictions. Daniel told me that much. If you start answering questions and then refuse to answer the important ones, people will assume the worst. What are you asking me to do? Nothing. Let the investigators work. Within 2 weeks, Navarro Coastal Freight received a reservation of rights letter from its insurer. The bank requested updated financial statements. A customer threatened a penalty of $620,000 for the cargo that never arrived. Ruth called an emergency meeting. I attended because Daniel's estate still held a small non-voting interest in the company. 86 payroll files were stacked in boxes along one wall of the conference room. Ruth pointed at them. Those are not numbers, she said. Those are families. She told the board the company would survive if everyone stayed disciplined. Then she used the phrase federal boarding complication for the first time. Not accusation, not yet, a complication. The insurer asked whether the boarding team had entered the machinery space. Ruth said she did not know. The lender asked whether federal personnel had touched the alarm system. Ruth said the investigation was ongoing. A reporter asked why the Celia N had sailed after a maintenance warning. Ruth said the vessel had passed all required checks before an unexpected government action. Every answer left the same shadow. Me. I returned home that night and opened the secure copy of my post-operation report. The 2 photographs of the bridge panel were attached. The silver tape covered the fire loop warning. The display time showed 6:43 in the morning. My written observation appeared beneath it. Possible fire detection repeater fault. Vessel representative advised that local detection remained operational. Observation transmitted for safety follow-up. The routing history showed the report entering the shared queue at 7:2, then moving to marine safety without review before departure. I searched my personal phone. Daniel's final message sat between a grocery reminder and a photograph of the kitchen sink he had promised to repair. Mom says one run, I will handle it. I read it until the words stopped looking like language. Then I locked the phone and placed it face down. I still had not decided whether Daniel had lied to me or lied to himself. Ruth made that decision irrelevant 6 months later. She invited me to the insurer's conference room and called it a family meeting. Her attorney was already there, so was Calvin Price, a claims consultant I had never met. A settlement agreement waited at my seat. The company would create a temporary wage fund for employees. Ruth would guarantee health coverage for 6 months. In return, I would withdraw any claim through Daniel's estate and sign a statement saying the boarding team had acted outside the safety scope understood by the vessel. I read the sentence twice. You want me to say we interfered with the ship? We are not assigning blame, Ruth said. That sentence exists only to assign blame. Her attorney leaned forward. It acknowledges a jurisdictional dispute. There was no jurisdictional dispute. Ruth uncapped her green fountain pen. Elise, if this company collapses, 86 people lose their income because you need everyone to know you were important. Price looked down at the table. I pushed the agreement back. My team did not enter the machinery space. No one can verify that. The access records can, if they still exist. That was the moment I understood this was no longer grief choosing convenient words. Ruth had begun calculating. I stood. She placed the pen beside the signature line. You cannot discuss the operation. You cannot produce the record. You cannot even explain why you were there. She looked almost gentle when she said it. What exactly do you think you can prove? I left without answering. 3 weeks later, Navarro Coastal Freight filed its limitation petition in federal court. Attached to it was Ruth's sworn declaration. She stated that I had misrepresented my qualifications, used a decorative badge to imply tactical authority, entered restricted engineering areas without the master's permission, and interfered with the alarm system during an operation the company had never consented to. She also said Daniel had told her I was only a port compliance officer. That part hurt more than the rest, not because I believed her. Because Daniel was dead, and she had chosen a version of his voice I could not question. I called Nora Patel that afternoon. She read the declaration without interrupting me. When she finished, she tapped one line with her fingernail. She swore you entered the machinery space. I did not. Good, that is good. It is specific. Nora opened a blank legal pad. Specific lies require specific records. We sent preservation notices that day to the company, the insurer, the outside maintenance contractor, the port authority, the electronic access vendor, and every custodian connected to the voyage data recorder. We requested the gangway log, machinery space access history, alarm event data, maintenance deferrals, insurer communications, and all versions of the audio Ruth intended to use. Then Nora asked the question I had spent months avoiding. If the records show Daniel knew the alarm was bypassed, do you still want them? The broken watch sat on my desk between us, 2:17. I thought about the 2 widows whose husbands had never reached the weather deck. I thought about Tomas twisting his wedding ring. I thought about 86 payroll files arranged like hostages against the conference room wall. Yeah, I said that answer was the point of no return. Until then, I had been trying to defend myself without disturbing the dead. After that, I wanted the full record, even if it spoke in Daniel's voice. The first records arrived 11 days after Nora sent the preservation notices. They did not arrive together. Truth rarely does. The Port Authority produced the gangway log first. It listed 7 members of the federal boarding team entering the Celia N shortly after 6 in the morning and leaving 51 minutes later. The ship's electronic access system produced a separate report. None of our credentials had opened the machinery space doors. Nora placed both documents beside Ruth's sworn declaration. She gave us 3 lies in 1 paragraph, she said. It proves where we were not. That is usually where a good case begins. It did not prove who bypassed the alarm. The outside maintenance contractor answered next. Its technician had inspected the repeater fault 2 days before the boarding. He recommended replacing a damaged control module and testing the entire fire detection loop before the vessel sailed. The repair required 14 hours. Ruth had approved 4. Attached to the work order was a maintenance deferral signed in green ink. The signature was hers, but the document only showed that she had delayed a repair. Her attorney argued that the local detectors remained functional and that Daniel, as operations director, controlled the final sailing decision. Ruth was already preparing a place for her dead son beneath the weight she intended to drop. The electronic alarm archive arrived on a Friday afternoon. Owen Mercer brought his own laptop and a set of old wired headphones to Nora's office. He did not trust conference room speakers. The event list showed the fire loop repeater placed in bypass mode at 12:38 in the morning, almost 6 hours before my team boarded. The bypass remained active through our inspection, departure, and the final voyage. Owen pointed at the entry. This command did not come from a camera, a radio, or someone touching the panel by accident. Could a boarding team have caused it remotely? Nora asked. No, could the system have moved the command backward in time? Owen removed his glasses. A recorder can lose an event. It cannot become nostalgic. The timestamp damaged Ruth's causation theory, but it did not yet prove who authorized the bypass or who knew it remained active when the ship sailed. For that, we needed people. Tomas agreed to meet us at a diner near the river. He arrived in work boots and a jacket with the Navarro Company logo stitched over the chest. His wife's medical appointment card was tucked behind the clear window of his wallet. He turned his wedding ring throughout the conversation. I told the master the bridge repeater was down, he said. Did you tell Daniel? I asked. Yes, did you tell Ruth? Tomas looked toward the kitchen. She called me. When? The afternoon before departure. What did she say? He pressed his thumb against the ring. She asked whether local detection still worked. What did you tell her? That the engine room detectors would sound locally, but the bridge might not receive the alarm. And then, she said Daniel would make the sailing decision. Nora closed her pen. Will you put that in a declaration? Tomas stared at the Navarro logo on his jacket. If this company closes, my wife loses the insurance paying for her treatment. I wanted to tell him the truth mattered more. That would have been easy for someone whose insurance was not attached to his courage. I am not asking you today, I said. Nora looked at me but did not object. Tomas stood. At the door he stopped. The bypass did not fix the warning, he said. It only told the ship to stop listening, then he left. The federal response arrived the following week. It was 4 pages long and said no in 12 different ways. The government would not produce the operational annex, target intelligence, partner agency records, or unredacted boarding report. Disclosure could reveal investigative methods and information unrelated to the casualty. Ruth's attorneys filed the response within hours. Their motion said the refusal proved my claims could not be tested. They asked the court to exclude my account of the boarding and treat the company's version as uncontested. For the first time since we began, Nora looked worried. They do not need to prove you are lying, she said. They need to make your truth unusable. I looked at Daniel's watch on the table. What can the government confirm? That depends on what the judge asks and what they are willing to release in redacted form. Before Nora could file our response, Ruth produced the audio. It was 23 seconds long. The file began with bridge noise and my voice speaking through a radio. Boarding complete, you are clear, then Daniel answered. Elise cleared us, the clip ended. Ruth attached it to a declaration from a marine electronics consultant she had hired. He claimed the words were consistent with a completed inspection and approval to sail. The company released the clip to the press the same afternoon. By evening, local news sites were running versions of the same headline. Widow led federal boarding before deadly fire. No article said I caused the fire. They did not need to. Ruth had learned that a question mark could do the work of an accusation. I listened to the clip 6 times. The first 4 times I heard the cut. A faint change in background noise after the word clear. A breath removed too neatly, the kind of edit most people would never notice. The 5th time I heard Daniel, Elise cleared us, not my exact words. His understanding of them. The 6th time, I heard myself wondering whether I had failed to make the warning strong enough. Nora stopped the playback. Do not let a cropped file rewrite your memory. What if Daniel believed it? Then we need the full recording. And if the full recording says something worse? She did not give me comfort. That is why we asked for the full recording. Ruth's motion was partially successful. The judge refused to admit the restricted operational annex into the public record. He also ruled that I could not simply testify to classified facts and expect the company to accept them without independent verification. But he did not exclude me. Instead, he ordered the government to submit the full material under seal for private review and state whether it could provide a redacted public declaration confirming my identity, authority, boarding scope, and departure time. Ruth called that order a victory. She believed the government would refuse again. The morning of the evidentiary hearing, she arrived with the cropped audio, Daniel's email saying I had cleared the ship, and the marine expert she had hired to explain why the alarm failure began with my team. I arrived wearing a charcoal suit. For the first time since Daniel's funeral, I pinned the silver insignia to the outside of my jacket. Not because it proved I was innocent, because Ruth had sworn it was fake, and I was finished helping her make small lies feel harmless. 2 widows waited near the courthouse elevators. Reporters stood beside the doors. Ruth saw the insignia, then she reached for it. I caught her wrist. Not hard enough to hurt her, hard enough to stop her fingers 3 inches from the insignia. You do not get to touch that. The reporters behind us went quiet. Ruth looked down at my hand, then back at my face. For 1 second, she understood that the version of me she had built was no longer cooperating. Then the courtroom doors opened. Inside, the clerk placed the sealed envelope against the edge of her desk and aligned it with a wooden ruler. By the time she broke the second seal, Ruth had recovered her smile. A sealed document cannot rescue a liar, she said. The judge warned her once, then the clerk began to read. The court is authorized to state that Lieutenant Commander Elise Navarro was the qualified boarding officer in charge, identified in the restricted operational record. Ruth's water glass slipped from her hand. It struck the oak counsel table with a hard crack, bounced once, and rolled through the silence until the clerk stopped it with the heel of her shoe. No one moved. The boarding was conducted under lawful federal authority. The team's approved access was limited to the main deck, bridge, cargo documentation area, and the designated container location. The clerk looked down at the next line. The official departure record confirms that Lieutenant Commander Navarro and all members of her team left the Celia N at 6:57 in the morning. Ruth's green pen stopped moving. Across the aisle, Nora placed the gangway log beside the electronic access report. For 20 months, Ruth had called me a port clerk wearing a decorative badge. Now my name, qualification, authority, scope, and departure time were part of the public record. Then she stood. A real badge does not make her innocent. Her voice was steady. That was what made the sentence dangerous. Ruth's attorney played the 23-second recording. My voice came through the courtroom speakers. Boarding complete. You are clear, Daniel answered. Elise cleared us. The recording ended. Ruth looked at the two widows seated behind Nora. My son believed his wife had approved the vessel to sail. A murmur moved through the gallery. The judge called for silence. Ruth's marine electronics consultant took the stand. He explained that boarding activity could disrupt vessel systems, that radio traffic could distract the bridge, and that my words sounded like operational approval. For several minutes, the public declaration seemed to have made Ruth's case stronger. I was no longer an imposter. I was a qualified officer whose words might have sent the ship to sea. Nora stood for cross-examination. You received the complete alarm event archive? Yes. The fire loop repeater was placed in bypass mode at 12:38 that morning? The consultant paused. Yes. Almost 6 hours before Lieutenant Commander Navarro boarded the vessel? Yes. Could her team have caused that command? Not at that time. Could they have entered the machinery space without appearing in the electronic access record? Not through the controlled doors. Could the recorder move an event backward by 6 hours? No. Nora walked to the evidence screen. Then whatever happened during the federal boarding, the bypass already existed. The consultant adjusted his glasses. That is correct. Nora kept him on the stand. The protected forensic image from the post-casualty voyage data recorder download also contains the alarm timeline? Yes, at 2:17 did a local machinery space detector register a heat condition? Yes. Did that condition appear on the bridge repeater at 2:17? No. When did the bridge receive the general alarm? 2:26, Nora displayed the access history beside the event log. At 2:16, whose credential opened the service passage door beside the machinery space? The consultant looked at the name, Daniel Navarro. The broken watch pressed against my pocket. For 20 months, 2:17 had been a question. Now it had an outline. Daniel had gone toward the warning 1 minute before the local detector registered what the bridge could not hear. Nora called Tomas next. He wore a plain jacket with no company logo. His wedding ring turned once beneath his thumb before he raised his hand to swear the oath. He testified that the local detectors remained active, but the bridge repeater might not receive the alarm. He testified that he warned Daniel. Then Nora asked whether anyone else knew. Tomas looked at Ruth. She called me the afternoon before departure. Ruth's attorney objected. The judge overruled him. What did you tell her? Nora asked. I told her the bridge might not hear the fire alarm. And what did she say? She asked whether the ship could complete one voyage before the repair. The room became very still. Nora placed the maintenance deferral on the screen. 4 hours approved against a 14-hour repair. The signature at the bottom was green. Ruth did not deny it. Daniel controlled operations, she said from counsel table. He made the final decision. Nora turned toward me before introducing the next document. It was the sailing authorization. Daniel's signature appeared at the bottom. For one foolish second I wanted to say it was not his. I wanted a handwriting expert, a damaged scanner, anything that could place distance between the man I loved and the decision on that page. But I recognized the way he crossed the final letter of his name. Daniel had authorized the voyage. Ruth saw my face. There, she said, you wanted the truth. She thought grief would make me retreat. She was almost right. Then Nora told the court that the full bridge audio had been recovered from the protected forensic image created during the post-casualty voyage data recorder download and preserved by the insurer. Ruth's attorney stood. We have not agreed to publish private communications involving a deceased employee. Nora looked at me. The judge asked whether we wanted the portion concerning Daniel restricted from the public record. If I said yes, we could still prove Ruth had cropped my warning. We could protect Daniel from the sentence that followed. The broken watch rested inside my pocket, 2:17. I thought of the two men whose names had spent 20 months beneath Daniel's memorial photographs. Leave it in, I said. Nora played the full recording. My radio voice filled the courtroom. Boarding complete. You are clear of our team. This is not a safety clearance. Do not sail with the fire loop bypassed. Confirm you understand. Daniel answered, understood. There was a pause. Then another voice from the bridge asked whether departure should be delayed. Daniel spoke again. I know what she said. Mom says one run. We fix it Monday. Nora stopped the recording. The waveform froze on the evidence screen. The first layer had established my warning, Daniel's acknowledgement, and the decision to ignore both. No one in the courtroom needed me to explain it. Nora advanced the file 11 seconds and pressed play again. A telephone rang in the background. The master answered. Ruth's voice came through the bridge speaker. The customer will assess the full penalty if we miss tonight's window. Local detection is active. Depart is scheduled. Daniel said, Mom, Elise told us not to sail. Ruth answered without hesitation. Elise is not the owner. The recording continued for 3 more seconds. Then the clip Ruth had released began. Boarding complete. You are clear. The cut was no longer subtle. It was an amputation. Ruth had removed my warning, Daniel's acknowledgement, and her own order. But Nora still had one layer left. She opened the export history produced from Calvin Price's consulting account. The altered clip had been exported under his credentials 2 days before Ruth filed it with the court. Nora enlarged an email attached to the export record. Ruth had sent it from her company account. Cut the warning. Keep Daniel's answer. Price had executed the edit. Ruth had designed it. She displayed the insurer's preserved copy of Ruth's draft casualty strategy. A handwritten note appeared in the margin beside the proposed boarding theory. Green ink, lead with the boarding, she cannot answer. The document metadata showed the file had been created 4 days before Ruth first described the boarding as a complication. Not grief, not confusion, a strategy. Ruth stared at the note. Her attorney moved his chair several inches away from her. The judge asked whether she had written it. Ruth looked at me instead. You would have let the company die. No, I said. I would have let the ship wait. It was the longest answer I gave her that day. The judge did not issue a final ruling from the bench. Real consequences rarely arrive with a gavel and a speech. He took the matter under advisement, ordered the full recording preserved, directed both parties to submit findings concerning owner knowledge, and instructed the clerk to refer the altered exhibit and Ruth's sworn declaration for possible sanctions. The hearing ended. No applause, no salute. Only chairs moving, papers closing, and 2 widows hearing their husbands' deaths discussed without being erased by Daniel's name. Ruth remained seated. For the first time since the fire, she had no version of the story left that belonged only to her. The ruling came 19 days later. The court denied Navarro Coastal Freight's request to limit its liability. The order found that the alarm defect and the decision to delay repairs existed within the owner's knowledge before the Celia N sailed. The death and injury claims would proceed. The altered audio, Calvin Price's export history, and Ruth's sworn declaration were referred for a separate sanctions review. The judge did not call her evil. He did not need to. He listed dates, signatures, and contradictions. Paper can be quieter than anger and still leave a deeper mark. The bank exercised its right to place the company under independent financial supervision. Ruth lost operational control. An outside restructuring officer took over the fleet, suspended 2 routes, and sold an empty warehouse Ruth had refused to touch because her husband once called it the future of the company. The sale funded payroll, health coverage, and the first payments to the injured crew members and the 3 families of the dead. Tomas's wife kept her insurance. He sent me a message with only 4 words. She starts treatment Monday. I read it twice, then deleted the reply I had written. He did not need me to turn his wife's illness into a lesson about courage. The board offered me Daniel's former position. I declined. I had spent too many years learning that saving an institution and controlling it were not the same thing. Ruth waited for me outside the courthouse after the final status conference. She looked smaller without the company's attorneys around her, but not softer. "You let them put Daniel's name beside mine," she said. Behind her, trucks moved through the port gate in a slow line. "No," I said, "I stopped helping you erase the other 2. Her mouth tightened. "I was protecting what he built." "You were protecting your right to decide what everyone else had to lose." She looked at the insignia on my lapel. For once, she did not reach for it. There was no apology, no embrace, no sudden understanding. Some people mistake the end of their control for betrayal. You cannot explain the difference while they are still mourning the power they lost. 6 months later, I began teaching casualty documentation workshops at a marine safety center near the river. The first class included deck officers, engineers, insurance investigators, and 3 company owners who looked uncomfortable whenever I said the words "written warning." I did not tell them about Ruth. I did not have to. I taught them that a bypass was not a repair, that a deadline did not reduce the temperature of a fire, that a record made before an accident could save more lives than a perfect explanation written afterward. Before the first session, I replaced the burned band on Daniel's watch. I did not repair the movement. The hand still rested at 2:17. I wore it anyway. For months, I had thought the stopped watch was asking me who had failed Daniel. Eventually, I understood it was asking a harder question. How many people was I willing to fail in order to preserve the easiest version of the man I loved? Daniel was not innocent in the way I had needed him to be. He was also not the lie Ruth built around him. He was a good man who made one frightened decision and never lived long enough to correct it. I could love him without correcting the record in his favor. That was the part Ruth never understood. Love does not require us to make the dead perfect. It requires us to stop using them as permission to harm the living. That evening, a night freighter moved down the Savannah River, its deck lights trembling across the dark water. I touched the cracked watch. Time had not started again. It did not need to. I finally knew where the truth had begun. If you have ever had to stop protecting the easiest version of someone you loved, tell me where your truth began. Quiet justice rarely arrives loudly, but it still deserves to be heard. Maybe you have protected someone's easiest version too. Maybe you stayed quiet because telling the whole truth felt like disloyalty. Maybe the person was gone, or sick, or still sitting across the table asking you to carry the part of the story they could not survive. Maybe your silence began as kindness and slowly became a room other people learned to lock from the outside. Not every false story is built in a courtroom. Some are built at dinner tables, where one person is always told not to ruin the evening. Some are built in offices, where the employee who remembers the dates is called difficult. Some are built after funerals, when grief gives the loudest person permission to decide what the dead meant, what they knew, and who must remain silent to preserve the family's peace. You may never receive a sealed federal declaration. There may be no clerk, no evidence screen, no judge willing to list every contradiction. Your record may be an old message you were told to delete, a bank statement no one expected you to read, a medical note someone summarized incorrectly, or the exact sentence you wrote down because your body understood the danger before your mind was ready to name it. That does not make your truth smaller. A record is not only paper. Sometimes it is memory protected from pressure. Sometimes it is a boundary stated before the next emergency. Sometimes it is the decision to stop translating another person's choices into excuses that make everyone else comfortable. The important part is not whether the evidence arrives dramatically. The important part is whether you are willing to stop editing it against yourself. Love is not an instruction to falsify the record. Grief does not give one person permission to erase another. Loyalty does not require you to call a warning an overreaction, a pattern an accident, or a deliberate choice a misunderstanding. You can remember the good without hiding the harm. You can miss someone and still tell the truth about what they did. You can forgive what is yours to forgive without surrendering facts that belong to other people too. For years, I thought dignity meant carrying the heaviest version of silence without letting anyone see it hurt. I was wrong. Dignity was not the silence. Dignity was refusing to use Daniel's death to make the other deaths more convenient. It was allowing the record to hold all of him, the man who respected my oath, the son who feared his mother's judgment, the operations director who authorized one voyage, and the husband who walked towards the fire after the decision had already been made. The truth did not require me to stop loving him. It required me to stop making love responsible for concealing him. You are allowed to do the same. You are allowed to write down the date. You are allowed to save the message. You are allowed to ask for the complete file instead of accepting the cropped version. You are allowed to tell one trustworthy person what happened before someone else teaches the room a cleaner story. You are allowed to set a boundary before you possess enough evidence to persuade everyone who benefits from doubting you. And you are allowed to leave some people unconvinced. The goal is not to win every argument. It is to stop abandoning your own position in the record. It is to stop volunteering as the missing page in someone else's defense. It is to understand that peace purchased with your credibility is not peace. It is only a delay, and delays do not reduce the temperature of a fire. I never wanted revenge. I wanted the warning restored, the names returned, and the truth placed where no one could crop it again. Revenge would have required Ruth's pain to satisfy me. It never did. What mattered was that her control no longer determined what the families of the dead were allowed to know. If someone you know is still carrying a silence that has been used against them, share this story with them. They may not need permission to become louder. They may only need permission to stop making themselves smaller for a version of peace that was never protecting them. Ruth said a sealed document could not rescue a liar. She was right about one thing. The badge never needed to rescue me. The truth only needed to be read aloud.